I feel as though it is difficult to be objective in my criticism with Karl Ove Knausgaard's work. I have read the My Struggle books, and it was the subject matter of my master's thesis. I've read his follow-up, his seasonal quartet, as well as his monograph on Edvard Munch, entitled So Much Longing in So Little Space. I've read his contribution to the Why I Write series, published by Yale University, called Inadvertent. And now I have finished the introduction to his newest fictional series, The Morning Star, and the run-up to the English translation of his second work in the series, The Wolves of Eternity. In summary, Knausgaard is one of my most read authors, and there is no love-hate relationship here. It is all love for a person who I consider to be a guiding light for this generation of writers and literature. The Morning Star is his first work of fiction in quite some time. In his My Struggle series, the auto-fictional books stayed relatively close to his life, though how close it actually was is a matter of some contention. According to some relatives, many of the details were way off the mark. But for me, these accusations sort of miss the point for what literature is in the first place. His seasonal quartet, particularly Autumn and Winter, were a series of explications and epistles to his soon-to-be-born fourth child, a girl. But it was also simply writing that had been abandoned from years prior. Spring and Summer were far more novel works, both in their recent innovative feel, but also, literally, Summer featured some snippets of fiction that could be put into a novel. It was clear to me that Seasonal Quartet was simultaneously an attempt to capitalize on his recent success, but it was also a laboratory for what Knausgaard wanted to do next. One element of his fiction that seems to be a through line is his aesthetic appreciation for the Christian Bible, having assisted in translating it from Norwegian into Norwegian. Everywhere in his fiction is talk of such symbols as angels, the relevance of Christ for humanism, the intense power of the language of ancient texts despite their simplicity, and so on. In The Morning Star, it is obvious to me that Knausgaard, like many authors it seems, is trying to bootstrap spirituality back into fiction and literature, but with an eye to maintaining its strangeness. This book begins with a kind of religious omen. A star appears in the sky, never before seen, originating from a place no person seems to understand. Scientists grapple with several possibilities: a hallucinatory event, a supernova. But these expert opinions are not really the bulk of the novel. Instead, the story is about how several ordinary citizens encounter the effects of the new star in our world. In that sense, it is quite literally Knausgaard attempting to bring this strangeness, this inexplicable occurrence, one that can be horrifying at times, into our known, sterile, secular, very narrow world. For those who haven't read Knausgaard, I would go out on a limb and suggest that this is what he's been doing this whole time. He is an author of the quotidian, and many critics have already identified the strange fact that he is allowed to write about the most mundane things while getting away with it. They have all sorts of names for it, whether it's the Washington Post calling it a secular faith, or others calling it alchemy. We all sense that if any other author were to do what he does, writing about drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes and buying groceries and talking about his insecurities, it would be laughed away as amateur writing. Several authors have even written about how Knausgaard has written about the domestic in a way that removes it from its feminine underpinnings, in a way that feels like robbery. For those criticisms, I would speak less to the categorical nature of Karl Ove being a man, and speak more to his individuality. Clearly he is doing something, because people will go out of their way to read thousands of pages of this, and they, like me, are clamoring for more. There is a kind of magic there, and if I were pressed to identify what it is, I would say that Knausgaard is simply able to hold a kind of attention that most of us appreciate in a digital world. His ability to hold on to moments, his focus, is magnificently robust. To do this as a person, and then to do this in writing, is a kind of athleticism. It is not nearly as electric, perhaps, as David Foster Wallace, nor as lyrical as Louise Glück, or as dense as Rachel Cusk, but it is absolutely a style, done intentionally. The downside to this style, that many people seem to latch onto, is simply its breadth. As Knausgaard has himself stated, it takes him 400 pages to say anything meaningful. I don't necessarily think that's true, but I would say that many people who have tried Knausgaard would agree. For sure, he paints broad brushstrokes. Here in The Morning Star, we are introduced to the phenomenon in a survey of 8 point-of-view characters, each with their own desires, conflicts, and topics of interest. I would say right off the bat that I don't expect to ever encounter these characters again in this series of books, just because I don't think plot and coherence is something that Knausgaard is after. So if you are interested in that sort of thing, prepare to be disappointed. The novel ends in a bizarre essay on death, rather than end at the reasonable point of another character having a climactic moment that rivals Stephen King. Knausgaard is intentionally anti-plot in that way. The Morning Star continues what I happen to believe is the author's attempt to make a space for the future of literature. Each generation, since the rise of the novel in the 19th century, has been strangely insecure about the place of the novel. With each new technological advancement, many authors attempt to redefine what the novel can be, much like painting did with the rise of photography. For many entertainment authors who write schlock, not much actually changes. But for those heady, capital L literature authors, considerations of form over content, attitudes towards style and technique, are everything. They are all that matters. And Knausgaard has always been obsessed. As a very well-read author, and an individual who is steeped in the publishing world, both as an editor himself and a person currently partnered with an editor, what you get when you read Knausgaard is not only his awareness of the world around him, a very open-minded and inquisitive pair of eyes, you also get a far deeper foundation of literacy that is strangely absent among writers. As a character in the publishing world mentioned in J.K. Rowling's polemical novel Silkworm remarked, "Everybody is writing books. Nobody is reading them." Knausgaard regularly references authors like Flaubert, not to mention philosophers from Foucault to Heidegger. He holds these close to his heart and will point them out in his observations in the same way that he might point out the pine trees on a drive. If you are well-read, or have a degree in the humanities, you might find Knausgaard to be the companion and friend you have wanted for years, but have not been able to find. The Morning Star is not a perfect novel. I think his attempts to wield together this quotidian to these harrowing, almost demonic occurrences can be quite jarring, whereas someone like Stephen King is able to transition much better between them in his style, and with his prolific background in the genre of horror and thrillers. In my mind, there are simply too many characters. I think that some characters rise up higher than others, the obvious being Egil, as he gets the last word, but he is also the closest stand-in to Knausgaard's own history and sensibilities. His next novel, The Wolves of Eternity, looks to focus in on simply 2 characters, while adding around 150 pages more, and I think this is where Knausgaard works best. This is his sweet spot. Still, I can see that The Morning Star's goal is to be an introduction to the phenomenon, as well as a thematic introduction to what we can expect in the series. This novel is incredibly dark. The larger situation is the death of a rock band whose interests lie in satanic material, and their deaths are depicted as being rather gruesome. Characters encounter violence, psychosis, suicide, and along the way they create counter-arguments in their mind for some of the most basic premises on life, death, ideas, and habits. In that way, The Morning Star is not for people who have ingrained ideas or strict belief systems. Knausgaard's writing to these individuals would come off either as weak or naive, or outlandish and pagan. For example, one gets the sensation that Knausgaard is clearly a dualist, using Egil in the final essay to discuss the difference between the shell, the body we act in, with our soul, whatever it is our being happens to be. Many materialists may find these ruminations therefore totally pointless, but equally, Knausgaard is deeply interested, like many authors are, in the revelations of new science. The sentience of trees, quantum theory, consciousness at an atomic level, otherwise known as panpsychism. These ideas exist so far afield from how we approach the world in our day-to-day existence that they might as well be a kind of spiritualism. Nobody in their right mind attempts to use Carlo Rovelli's explanation that there is no time in order to skip a day of work. And yet books like these are so revolutionary that, to a novelist like Knausgaard, literature has been painfully slow to catch up. But for the majority of people who believe in a Judeo-Christian God, and who work 9 to 5 and spend their evenings watching reality television, this can all seem unhinged. Yet Knausgaard wields these ideas like his observations, and they are sprinkled liberally throughout. Ever since Knausgaard read Michel Foucault's The Order of Things, he has been deeply interested in breaking apart the barriers between physical and spiritual, between rational and irrational. The Morning Star is a continuation of this interest. To wrap this all up, I happen to think that The Morning Star continues Knausgaard's quest to update the novel. His insecurities about verisimilitude in fiction did not have an answer in my struggle, but this is his answer now. His answer is to lean in towards the strength of what fiction and literature can do, which has little to do with plot, but has everything to do with a feeling and a tone, and the application of those tones to ideas. To make this happen, Knausgaard is willing to forsake all other structures that authors have used in the past. But this places a great amount of pressure on you, the reader. If you are interested in a bristling intelligence attempting to recreate the novel in broad strokes, you must read Knausgaard. But if you find this experimentation conceited or boring, you won't find anything new here. I have grown to love Knausgaard and other unapologetic authors. As much as I like authors like Jonathan Franzen, who strive to be entertaining, authors who think carefully about the reader, I feel confident enough as a reader now that I'm not worried about when an author doesn't hold my hand all the time. At this point, Knausgaard is probably my favorite writer, in a very close race with Rachel Cusk. Both of these authors address a need in literature that I feel is being matched. Thank you for listening. I hope I have convinced you either way on the matter of Karl Ove Knausgaard. His next book, Wolves of Eternity, will likely be out by the time you hear this, and I intend to keep going. Thank you.